Hello and welcome to OppiFM. We will be spending the next 2 hours discussing the national fees must fall crisis, a topic on everyone's lips. My name is Paige Muller and I will be your host for what should be an exhilarating conversation.
Can I have your attention?
Educating the entire student body on race, gender, class, sexuality.
There's no objective journalism.
No one has to perform poverty at all.
Not all students matter in this university, and that is a fact. It's supposed to be about robust political debate.
This is OppiFM.
So today we're going to be discussing the thing that's on everyone's minds, the elephant in the room really, the fees must fall movement. That's been considered a national crisis by some, not so much a crisis if you're in government by others. And today in studio we have with us three gentlemen, and they wanted me to point out that they are gentlemen and they're worried about the lack of women in the room, but that's what I'm here for. Okay, so with us this evening, we have Professor Philip Machanick, who is joining us in his capacity as a member of the concerned staff and as a peacekeeping entity. Mr. Wesley, Searle, a lecturer from the Department of Politics and International Studies here at Rhodes University. And finally, Chris Morris, a member of the Rhodes Asinamali group, as well as an involved member of the leaderless movement of Fees Must Fall here at Rhodes. Thank you all so much for joining us in your studio here today.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Professor, you said that you wanted to make a distinction between your role as a concerned staff member and your role as a peacekeeping entity when we spoke earlier. So I thought maybe we'd just go around and discuss how everyone's been involved in the protests in their different capacities. So let's start with you, Mr. Machanick.
Right, well, the concerned staff group is a very diverse group that sometimes has big disagreements and is generally a collective of staff, mostly academic, some support staff, who have concerns about the way the protest movement's been handled by the university. The peacekeeping group is a distinct group. It has some overlap with concerned staff. It also has some who are not in concerned staff, even some outsiders like Andrew Hunter, for instance, the Dean of the Cathedral. And we do keep those two roles separate because the peacekeeping group tries to sit in a neutral space where conflict could arise and try to understand the sides of the conflict and prevent it from escalating. Whereas the concerned staff group has definite positions. So I try to somehow put on a different hat and be a different person in these two roles. And so when I discuss these two issues, I hope that people listening will understand that I'm trying to be two different people when we talk about these things.
Okay, so explain to me how then the concerned staff is structured. You said they're very specific roles. How does that work?
Well, concerned staff is actually not particularly structured. It's a group of people who come together around particular issues. Around some issues, there may be a different group of people. So there's a core group who are generally there. But if we have a particular position on a particular issue, we may find some people don't agree with that. For instance, opposing the interdict, not necessarily everyone in the concerned staff group went along with that. We had, I think, 33 people who joined the case in opposition. On other issues, we might have a much broader group who join in. So it's an informal group, pretty much the same as the protest movements that have arisen, that coalesces around particular issues, and the number of people who are there might shift in or out, sometimes in a very mild-mannered way, sometimes with a bit of conflict. But it's, that's just the nature of these sort of informal groupings.
And what have you done exactly as a peacekeeping entity? What exactly does that involve and what does that mean?
Well, it's a very difficult role, and we've had to define it as we went along. I had some experience of doing this in the 1980s at Wits University, where I was part of an official peacekeeping group headed by a deputy vice-chancellor, and there our role was to discourage the police and the students from doing things that would lead to violence, often without either side particularly appreciating that, but nonetheless we had official support, which in a way made it easier. Yeah, this thing actually started when I was out of town, and someone else who would prefer not to be named as a PhD student actually started it on campus. During the RU references protest, I'd actually offered our Vice-Chancellor the possibility of creating such a thing. He wasn't interested at the time. When I came back after the first week of the Fees Must Fall protests, this was already being done by this other person, the PhD student. And there are various different things we tried, some which worked and some didn't.
All right. Chris, you are actually a member of the student body who's involved in two very, very closely knit groups, the Rhodes, Asinamali, and the Fees Must Fall movements.
Yep.
How do you distinguish yourself as a student between those two groups? And what Phil's just said about managing peace, do you feel like the concerned staff and those peacekeeping entities have helped at all as a student protester, or not really?
Sure. Well, on the first question, Asinamali is also one of these loosely formed student groups. We've been active throughout the year dealing with various issues, particularly if affecting students who don't feel welcome, as was played in the intro clip. So, for example, there are Oppidan students who struggle to get food, the price of food is extreme, and it's getting worse with the crisis that the country is in generally. And so we fought, it's an ongoing battle, trying to get students fed so that they can perform academically. So now Asinamali, as that very loosely formed group, we had obviously an interest in this Fees Must Fall protest. We came together with other student groups and other individual students. The group has grown, expanded, and contracted over the period. But we're an independent member of Fees Must Fall. I did ask that I speak in my capacity as a member of Asinamali because I don't have a mandate from Fees Must Fall to speak about the protest and about what we're doing as Fees Must Fall. But I am there as an individual member and as Asinamali, as an interested student.
I have a question on that. The Rhodes Fees Must Fall movement suggests it's been saying to everyone that it's a leaderless movement.
Yeah.
So when you speak on a mandate, who is this mandate coming from? Who are we looking to as the people who draw up mandates for certain people to speak or not to speak?
Well, this is a very interesting question, and I think it's about the way a new politics is being formed, and it's very experimental, some of it. I mean, since last year, I know with the BSM, it's structuralist. So the idea with the structuralist thing is that you don't have voices that dominate the movement. You don't have structures that ossify and that prevent sort of the spontaneity from that can arise when movements are leaderless. It is an experimental thing, so it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what we're doing all the time and where we're going, and strategizing is a challenge. But what does happen is that you tend to find a core group of students come together, and the way we've set up the process, it hasn't worked ideally all the time, but is to call us a mass student body meeting, put forward some suggestions that we've discussed as this core, put it to students, hear from them what they think about those, but then also say to students, what are some of your thoughts, what are some of your own ideas that you've been thinking about. So when we get the mandate, it comes out of that mass process where we say, okay, this is our idea, what do you think, what are your own ideas, and then students, that interaction from there, when resolution is reached, that's a mandate.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and then, sorry, to go to the second question you asked earlier about the peacekeeping and how...
If it's been helpful.
If it's been helpful. Definitely, it's important. I think that it's been important for us that staff members show that support just for our physical integrity, for our safety. It's been, I don't know how helpful it's been all the time, because, I mean, the police have big guns and big bombs, and I don't know how much Phil can do against a stun grenade or rubber bullet by himself, and even with other peacekeepers. We do appreciate it. A lot of the time, they do make it clear that we actually aren't violent, and that we are victims of violence. And I think they've been important for getting out that message. So we're appreciative of the role they've played. It's tough. We're facing this militarization of our campuses. We're facing violence every day, and we need all the help we can get. So we're grateful for that.
All right, and Wesley, you're a political scientist who actually studies these sorts of movements. Now, I'm not 100% great with the politics, so could you explain to me what some of the pitfalls could be with the leaderless movements like the Fees Must Fall movement, Black student movement, even the concerned staff who aren't necessarily governed by one person?
Well, thanks again to everybody for having me here this evening. I think that to start off with, just to indicate the role that I played during the protests, I was part of a team that facilitated the first set of negotiations between all university stakeholders. And that led to the second phase that was also unsuccessful. But we kind of, together with Fred Hendricks, Robbie van Niekerk and Innocent Msindo, we kind of set the groundwork for those negotiations. I was particularly tasked to deal with two groups of sets of people, the concerned staff on the one hand and the students on the other hand, and Fees Must Fall, and particularly for this reason, because my background is in this kind of type of organizations, which is rather horizontal, that is leaderless, as we would say. I don't want to start with the pitfalls, then rather to start off with what the advantages of such organizations are. And I think it takes us back to the early days of democracy. You would recall that ancient Greeks, though they were free white men with property, they would easily just come into the square and into the forum, and they would discuss the issues of the city-state at the time equally. As I say, of course, people were excluded. But this was a kind of very different democracy to what we have today. And what we have certainly found over in the theory in the last couple of years is that we have the re-establishment of these kind of social movements taking on this kind of nature of a very democratic, very horizontal organization, precisely because of the kind of democratic deficits that we have in our democratic systems today. That elites are running our democracies, as it were, and that many people, democracy, I mean, is supposed to be the rule of the demos, of the people, and it's anything but that. If we look for towards the United States and the elections at the moment, for example, so it's quite important for us to highlight the advantages of this kind of very, very, very democratic in its very nature. Kind of organizations. Of course, as we say, the pitfalls are plentiful, but of course, on the one hand, we can say that they are plentiful and that they are disadvantages. We can't relate, for example, to a specific group of leaders. But I think that I wouldn't want to necessarily identify the pitfalls as much as I would want us to have a different sort of set of mind when we approach these kind of organizations. We kind of view these organizations through the prism of the democracy that we have set up, a very kind of elitist democracy where you have to have a group and a set of elite leaders, and that's not what is necessarily needed. We must be able to engage movements when they come to us and say, well, these are our 10 representatives this time round, and next time round we deal, because it's not about personalities, it's about the issues that need to be addressed. And often our democratic systems fail us because they deal on personalities, as we see in the US at the moment. We're dealing with personalities rather than what the main issues are.
You raised something very, very interesting there. There was a time when the meetings and negotiations started that a handful of people from the student body went in as representatives. And in that first meeting, I believe actually you were all present, weren't you? Yeah.
I was in the second meeting.
Oh, second meeting, all right. And there was a bit of a confusion among management who thought that they would be dealing with the same representatives over and over again, and there was kind of a standstill there. So all of you, the concerned staff members, student body, Fees Must Fall representatives, and as you said, Wesley, you helped organize some of these meetings. Did you feel that during these sessions you were managing to come towards a similar goal at the end of the day, or do you feel as if all of the organizations are still butting heads in a big way?
Could I start off by saying that
Sure.
our team certainly were I think that it was important, two things we had to keep in mind. The first thing was that we needed to keep people talking to each other. The first way to address violence is not to prevent violence, but not to deal with the symptoms of violence as much as it is to prevent violence. And one prevents violence by sitting down and talking. And so it was very important for us to make sure that at all times, even though representatives changed, and it wasn't only the students that we saw a change in delegations, often management delegations would change as well. But it was important for us on the one hand to keep people talking. And we had to do that keeping in mind the second principle, that we were dealing with a situation here locally at Rhodes in Grahamstown, but we were actually fighting against a national movement. And so that we were always aware that no matter what agreement that would reach with the students or with the stakeholders here in Rhodes, that we always had to keep in mind that students were fighting this because it was a national fight. It was beyond our control in a sense. So that whatever agreement that was reached here was determined what happens nationally all the time, and we had to keep that in mind. And so, yes, these two principles, on the one hand, keeping people talking, but on the other hand, keeping in mind that we were kind of having this, as one of us said, we were fighting against thunder.
Well, both of the other two are very eager to speak, so if you don't mind, I'm going to start with Phil, because he caught my attention first.
Sure. Yeah, it's very interesting to get the more theoretical background from Wesley on this, because I've kind of had to learn some of the stuff on my feet in the street, so to speak, that in the peacekeeping role, we have a very interesting problem mediating. I don't want to use the word mediating in the formal sense, but in the more informal sense of communication between a highly structured organization that has very set procedures, namely the police, and this highly unstructured organization with no leaders, namely the protest. And it's been a real interesting experience that we've managed to get the police to be a lot more flexible than strict following of their procedures, because they actually don't want mayhem either. And there have been interesting challenges. For instance, we need sometimes to inform the protest that if they took a certain action or changed a particular action, then the police would feel comfortable to just let it go, even if it was technically illegal. And then we'd have to find out who to talk to in the protest, because it's not only the question of the protest as leaderless, but as peacekeepers trying to stay in a neutral space, we don't actually want to know too much about the protest. If we actually could identify somebody as a leader and that then leaked out to the police, it would look as if we were informing. So, we have, in a way, fitted into this very loose, informally structured movement simply by the pragmatic concern that we didn't want to know too much about what either side is doing. And, from the point of view of police as well, if we knew what their operational plans were, we would be sucked into their mechanism. So by trying to keep in this relatively neutral space, we have, almost by accident, fitted into a role of being able to mediate the highly structured versus the unstructured. And, that is, I think, where the universities really struggle to deal with this thing, because they are used to dealing with highly structured organization. From very early on, they had this issue of, who are you? You're not the SRC. We only talk to official structures. And, to me, immediately that seemed like a huge mistake, even without the deeper understanding of somebody who studied this from the theoretical point of view. And, I think that we can learn a huge amount just from what has happened here, beyond issues such as peacekeeping and solving this immediate crisis. And, if we can build on this to not only deal with student politics, but make the university a more flexible, a more responsive organization that is not driven by deeply structured committees that bury everything. The whole transformation agenda, for instance, let alone decolonization, has been drowned in committees. So if we could take some of these ideas out to the broader university, not purely as methods of protest, but as ways of running the organization more flexibly and more democratically, I think there's a real challenge to do that because of all the conflict that's arisen around this. But, let's keep talking. Let's get these ideas out.
All right, Chris, what did you have to say on that?
No, I think Phil and Wesley are being very nice to management. From what I understand, in the meetings I was with and from discussions from our representatives reporting back, as Phil said, firstly we were hit with stonewalling at the beginning. You're not SRC, we don't recognize you. I think then Wesley and them played this role of saying, look, you need to sit down and talk to these people. When that eventually did happen, management in the meetings, I think there was at some point, it seemed as though over 6 hours management could have said 10 words all together. They were not very communicative. Their body language as well in the meetings was suggesting that they pissed off and they don't want to talk about these things. I think the attitude from the beginning was, let's as Wesley said, let's deal with these local things. Let's get it out of the way quickly so that we can get back to school. It wasn't about trying to understand, trying to listen, trying to deal with the issues in a way that so that we can work together, work through them, and move forward. I do think, though, and I hope my comrades don't roast me for this, we did make a strategic mistake in the local demands. I personally was of the opinion that we should have stuck with the national demands, which seem to be free decolonized education immediately. I think the local demands kind of sucked us into this negotiation table where we spent many hours going around circles, basically discussing things that could have been possible, that could not have been possible. I know that the thinking behind that was that, look, we need to make an example as a university. So we'd sit down with management, we'd try to get them to make some concessions, and then eventually get them to say, okay, thank you, management. Now can you take this to the government and tell them, look, these kids are fighting for free education, and we've done what we can in order to move things a bit forward locally, but now you need to take it much further and try to deal with the question of free decolonized education. But I do think that we've been met with an attitude, a very hostile, unwilling attitude. I think that the actions of management show that the militarization of campus, the painting of students, particularly at this university, as violent, when that's just clearly not been the case. So we find that I personally found management throughout the negotiations to be unwilling. They did begin to engage more with what we were saying, engage with the demands, and that was hopeful. But I do think that they missed the point about the local and national thing.
Yeah, and again, I think we should provide that context to our listeners here today, that actually this all started on the 19th of September 2016, where the Higher Minister of Education and Training, Bladen Zamande, announced that universities should cap their fee increment at 8% for the year of 2017. And Zamande added that the government should subsidize the fee increments for students from poor backgrounds, students from NSFAS, and students who come from family incomes less than 600,000. But the students from various universities did not take kindly to this announcement and didn't feel as if it had addressed the problem of free education and the higher issues of the way that student fees for universities have raised. So we spoke to some of these students to find out where they stand today.
SRC President Lindo Kuhlo-Mokoena from the University of Free State South Campus speaks about the Fees Must Fall protest at his campus and the internal battle between students and the SRC.
We had a meeting on Monday with all the SRC presidents and all the student leaders, and nothing was formalized as yet as how we were going to protest. On Tuesday, a mass meeting was held, where after that mass meeting, the SRC the president started, the Bloom campus president issued a statement that they're actually calling off the protest from the university. So that actually led to the students actually defied that and actually started the movement of their own called Free Education. The Free Education movement actually was there before last year. It was given rise again because of the fact that the SRC came out with a statement to say that they are calling off the protest because of the fear of violence. So now students were actually saying that they cannot agree with the SRC statement because of the fact that, number one, there were no threats of violence. Number two is that they took a decision that was not in the interest of students, but in the interest of few individuals. So now the free education movement actually comprised of students who actually took it upon themselves to elect leaders who lead the free education movement so that the Fees Must Fall protest can actually stay alive and be sustained without the SRC present.
Student activist Mthandile Lengs from the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University speaks about the challenges protesters have because of Fees Must Fall.
Speaking on behalf of NMMU, our SRC has withdrawn from our protest for personal and political reasons. And with them withdrawing, they've also withdrawn their resources from us, which are shuttles and transport food, etc. NMMU is mainly an off-campus-based university, so most of our students live off-campus and in town. So now the students cannot get to where the strike is. Therefore, we have smaller numbers protesting. Management and SRC has blocked resources for us mainly because of Fees Must Fall. The objective of shutting down a university when using Fees Must Fall is we use it for leverage. If you do not shut down schools, management will not be able to engage with you. The people that you want to get their attention, they will not give you their attention because their mandate is carrying on while your mandate is not going to carry on. So when you shut down schools, you force your mandate to be heard as students.
Simon Reiki from the University of Cape Town explains the implications students are faced with for participating in the Fees Must Fall protest.
I'm speaking from a very specific context. From my reference or point of view, there has been targeted attempts at certain individuals. So the university has, if you look at how the cases have been built or have been constructed, you'll see that the evidence provided actually goes as far back as the protests around March 2015 last year for events that happened in February 2016. If you follow the trail, you'll see that management has been keeping and monitoring a very specific trail up for specific individuals and just waiting for the right time. So for instance, when an interdict is brought out, you always find that there are certain individuals or certain people who will always be on an interdict, even though they went on campus when whatever happened. It's because they can just link you to the events which happened. So they extrapolate information based on past events. That's the one thing. But then also currently what's happening is they will be serving interdicts and pressing charges against certain people as of next week, and they have been building cases already. But the thing is they haven't even charged anyone. So again, even without anything wrong being committed, there's a constant monitoring of certain people and gathering information and collating evidence to formulate a case even before they've done anything wrong. It's just a matter of them waiting for the right time. So that's how they do it from my understanding.
SASCO chairperson Mpendulo Mfika from Rhodes University explains what Fees Must Fall is about and what to expect from the movement as a whole.
Now, what sparked the protest this year, Fees Must Fall, was to say President Mande announced that he will cap the increment at 8%. Now, that's very contrary to what we had expected. We had expected him to at least say, okay, I'm going to give you free education by this date. But instead, he went against what we had expected. So those are part of the reasons that spiked the protest this year. The things that they are in and of themselves, we do not afford them. Now, another thing which we took into consideration was to say, as much as the Minister of Higher Education says he will cover NSFAS and he will cover the missing middle, the intake of NSFAS students won't be the same as the previous year. On the following reasons, they might say that they will cover for every NSFAS student and that NSFAS student won't owe a cent, but it means that there's one who might not come back next year because the money will be used to cover for another one. So it's really like they're playing around with the lives of black families in society. A large number at this university of students are saying it's time for free education now. And at all costs, we are going to get it because we believe that in 30 years, there will be children who are sitting down reading books and they will judge us harshly if we do not acquire the free education for them.
A student from the Northwest University was unable to comment on the Fees Must Fall protest but had this to say instead.
Last time what happened, the person called me from the management level and said it's from radio what. Then I expressed my view from there. I'm first now with the warning letter because of seeing that particular things on media. Now is another thing again. The second warning, then the final, I'm going to get suspended.
Okay, we just heard from a lot of the other universities which have given us an idea of the kind of odd victimization of students, things like they've been called by people pretending to be journalists to get information from them, so they're not actually willing to speak. Police cars following them around at night, things like that. So the universities all seem to be taking a very harsh and similar tactic against protesters, one that's kind of looking to squash this movement where it stands. However, each campus has its own local issues, as we do here at Rhodes. Do you think that police and management and the government as a whole are somewhat overreacting here at UCAR with terms of interdict and police and whatnot with the protests here. Chris, could you start off for us?
Definitely. I think there's been what's interesting is that it seems there's definitely a political directive given to policemen, police people, that you squash protest. And the VCs, you would have thought, I personally am very surprised by the way that VCs, vice chancellors across the country, seem to be willing to militarize and to bring in police and to have their universities become, like we call them, training camps and police academies. So there definitely has been this overreaction, but I think the worst part about it's being fed by media. So this idea that students are violent, this idea that students are just anarchists, out not in the political sense, just out for anarchy. I think that also there's been, on our campus, there's been a lack of understanding about how we've gone about protesting. So, for example, we've been painted with this brush of violence and as intimidatory, and many students actually on campus say we feel more threatened by police presence and less threatened. We don't even feel, many of them, threatened by students. So management and the police have taken this very hardline attitude towards students, and we surprised by it. But now when we coming to understand the political implications of fees must fall and what it means for the state, for the government, in particular, a government in crisis at the moment, we think that it's a very unsophisticated approach, and it's surprising that management has bought into it to just completely let the dogs of the police loose on us.
Okay, I'd like to provide some context to our listeners about what you're talking about in terms of the media here at Rhodes. In particular. We had a fire, the origins of which were unknown to us, but the SABC in particular decided to brand that fire with a very particular image that wasn't from our university, and that made the damage and the extent of the fire look a lot worse than it was. That as well, on the day after police had shot at students here on our Drosty lawns at Rhodes University, the Daily Dispatch had branded an image of that event along with, what did it say, Phil? You were part of that story.
I don't read everything
Professors
everyone
of
writes
protest.
about me.
They
It was
also
headlined
they had
Professors of Protest.
Yeah, and they had a picture the day after we were shot. They put a picture of students from another university, students who had lined up rocks and were ready to battle the police, whereas we were not even on the streets and we had no rocks. And they used a picture from another campus, another university. Sorry, if I may, on this idea of the fires. Earlier in the year, there was the RU reference list protest. The management then they claimed that people were kidnapped and they sought this interdict. And then a few days before the hearing for finalizing the interdict, in the morning I woke up to a very strange statement by Nahal saying that they distanced themselves from students. And I thought, wow, what is this? And then a few hours later, there was a report of a small little fire in the council chambers. And now thinking about it, I think management was taking this as ammunition into the hearing about the interdict. Then this happens after a peaceful protest is shot up by police. Students are shot and dragged off to the cells. Then during the Fees Must Fall protest, we have a peaceful protest. Police are called in. They shoot at students. They arrest students. A few days later, there's another small fire that does no damage to the university. And it's just like, so there are many questions from the student body. Who actually starts these fires? How is it that they're so small? How is it that they reach so quickly? Is it just a ploy by management to paint us as these arsonists, violent arsonists, where they light up little fires, get rid of them, and they have an excuse to then militarize the campus and deal with us violently?
That's an interesting prospect. I don't have any evidence for that, and I wouldn't know where to take it, but it is an interesting thing to think about. We've spoken earlier about management's view, and I think we're touching on it here again. And Wesley, you were talking about how management, actually, Phil, I think you were talking about how management had a very direct stance on who they ought to be speaking to, and it ought to be the SRC and that sort of thing. But now we had just listened to a couple of interviews from national universities telling us that their SRCs have pulled out of their protests, and this has led to a diminishing amount of protesters willing to come through to the protests, and there seem to be a lot of implications to that. Wesley, what do you think the implications are of a student representative body not necessarily representing the protesting students at this stage?
Well, let me start off with just the previous question about violence and the protesting and is there heavy-handedness or heavy-handedness by management and the police at UCA in particular. And I think it's important for us to understand that certainly government and university managements want to make examples. So they are using campuses and instances of campuses on campuses nationwide to use people as examples. And we have to understand this within the context in which South Africa is. Given our gross unemployment, our gross huge levels of inequality, and the levels of unemployment, it's important for us to understand that we are a country continuously in a state of protest, one. Two, that there are high levels of crime taking place on a daily basis. It's interesting that of 9 people arrested for the violence happening in Bramfontein, for example, only 4 of them are Wit students. So where did the other 5 come from? So we must be very, when we look at this and when we see the reaction of particularly government and the police, we have to keep this always in mind, that they kind of coming out strongly against this in their normal kind of reaction to protests and crime levels within the country. But what makes these protests very threatening to them is that, one, it's coordinated. It's happening in defined spaces. Protests happen in this country on a daily basis. What people like Bond and Motte call pop-up popcorn protests. They pop up and then they die down almost immediately in various parts. But what has happened here is that you have coordinated protests happening on university campuses. And they are continuous. They started last year and they're continuing throughout the last year. They go into moments of lull, but ultimately they resurge. And then finally they're happening in middle class spaces. And this is what is making it different. They are making it, these protests are happening in spaces that are not traditionally working class or in poor areas, but they're in middle class spaces. And usually when we look at revolutionary theory, anything that happens in a middle class kind of space is very, very threatening, and we have to understand this. So we have to understand this reaction by the police and government and university managements. But let me respond to Chris's earlier comment about it being nice to management. I think that the biggest culprits in all of this are university managements. There has been a huge deflection onto government and onto the state. We're continuously complaining about low amounts of income. Yet on the other hand, we also complain about children coming through basic education not being prepared for university. So should we be investing more in basic education, or should we be spending more money on higher education? Never mind the fact that our higher education system is grossly slanted towards universities, when we should be encouraging young people to go rather to become artisans, plumbers, skills, those kind of things, and that's happening in TVET colleges. So I think that it's important for us to understand that, you know, when children in a house, and I'm not saying that the students are children, but when children in a household rebel, we can't blame who our parents work for. That doesn't make sense. We must rebel against our parents, and our parents who are running the household, they're the ones that must make the changes. So if they're complaining, if my folks complain about not earning enough from their employer, they can't tell me that. They must make a plan about that within our household and how we spend our money. And that's the problem mostly at universities. We're demanding for more money, but we don't even know where the little money that we are getting is going. This is the problem that we have at our universities.
That's
So
an interesting thing, because there was a meeting where you actually called Rhodes University the poor white man in today's society, and I think that's...
Well, I think so. I think it's a very good analogy, because how is it possible that Rhodes University does not have reserves at the moment, for example? And these are the kind of questions that need to be asked, and we are not asking that of our universities. Of course, places such as I've said before, places such as Stellenbosch and even UCT and Wits, they could pull out of the public education system and go private altogether, and they wouldn't have this kind of thing. But that would create a gross unequal kind of system for higher education in this country. And I think that is what we need to also focus on, that yes, it's our university managements that need to take responsibility for this, because on the other hand, they're also complaining about autonomy, and any measure by government to kind of say, we're not going to give you money if you don't transform, for example, is met with resistance by university managements. So they want autonomy on the one hand, but they don't want to take responsibility on the other hand. So I think but to answer your question on the SRC, we've certainly seen that, especially at UCAR. We've seen this challenge between the SRC and students. And my role is not to be nice to anybody. So I'm not going to be nice to the students either. The students have not been unified in these protests. I think this is one of their biggest weaknesses. And they know that there is this division between the SRC and the student body. But it's what Philip mentioned earlier, between these very high-structured organizations, natured organizations, versus these very low-structured or any structured organizations. An SRC is a high-structured organization. It existed 100 years ago when UCAR was established. It will exist in 100 years' time. But movements such as Asimali or Fees Must Fall, all these things, will hopefully not be existing in 100 years' time, but an SRC will. So we need to understand that we are expecting, actually, when we expect the SRC to take up these battles, we're somewhat expecting a cat to bark. It's not the role of the SRC to take up these kind of issues. That's not the role of the SRC. The SRC is there as an institution, highly structured. It has a constitution, it has positions, it has all these different kind of roles. It's a breed and an animal on its own. And that the student movements, and especially the social movements, need to appreciate.
I have to stop you there because Phil looks like he's about to crawl out of his skin. He's been wanting to say something. Go for it.
Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm too nice to some people. It's just my nature. And, it's one of the reasons I got into peacekeeping was I didn't want people to get hurt. And one of the things I worry about in these situations is dehumanizing the other side. But I want to get to a thing which goes back to the 1980s experience of how you go about stopping protests. We didn't stop anti-apartheid protests by throwing more police and lawyers at the problem. We stopped anti-apartheid protests by getting rid of apartheid. And the issue currently, Fees Must Fall, is not the only issue. It's just the current main driver of the protest. There are a lot of other deep underlying issues. If you look at the attitudes that come out in unguarded moments in social media, for instance, the white supremacist narrative still runs very deep in our society. And in times of stress, sometimes people say things that they wouldn't otherwise say. I'm not going to mention names here, but there's been some stuff which has had a lot of mention, for instance, on the student Facebook group. So what we need to really focus on is not stopping the protests, but figuring out what it is that is making people so angry, not just this one movement, but more broadly. And, to me, it's really troubling that the students from the very demographics that we should most want at this university feel alienated and unwanted. And, we should be really rethinking what this university stands for. My personal view would be something like the intellectual home of free Africa, that the university belongs to all, but has a special place for those whose ancestral land it's built on. And, that would be a starting point for discussion of what it should be rather than a monument to dead white imperialists. And until we start engaging with those sort of issues, the anger's still going to be there. It'll pop up with the next issue.
Sure.
All right, I'm going to get to you right now, Chris. We're talking now about stopping protests, and a lot of the narrative has been that students are shooting themselves in the foot. Now, that's the idea, that protesting students have been shooting themselves in the foot. The academic year is not going to continue, and then people will have to spend more money on another year, blah, 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 and so it goes. And I think that has also created a large division among students, like Wesley was talking about earlier. And I think, Chris, you're the perfect person to comment on that sort of thing. Is there this divide between students? How are we going to progress here with this narrative being thrown around?
There's a few things that come from what Wesley said, what Phil said, and the question you're asking now. They may need to do with strategy. I think, firstly, about students not being united. This is not a fees must fall phenomenon, especially at this campus. Problems with the SRC started before the ARU reference list protest. I think it does speak to the point that Wesley made earlier, is that people have lost faith in democratic institutions. I think sometimes it's to the detriment of those institutions and the people themselves. I do think that they do need to operate in a new way, but they are constrained heavily. And I think what would be interesting is if the SRCs began to use the institutional power that they do have in a not in this formalistic way as they currently do, but really trying to understand what many students are saying, and take that forward in a new way, in an exciting way, in a way that speaks to us as students who have these problems with the SRC. I do think that many of the people in the SRC get sucked into the formalism of the SRC. They get sucked into those processes, and they're not thinking about them creatively and how they can use that institution to take forward some of the students' issues. Now, it does have an impact on our ability to unite students. This is a problem of society. People have faith in institutions. People have very reactionary ideas when it comes to these new movements and new types of organizing. Many people claim that they support us, but they want to see taken up by the SRC. But the SRC, quite frankly, is hamstrung at the moment, especially at this university. So I do think that if there was some indication from the SRC that they are willing to take up our issues and fight for them in an energetic way, not in a very formalistic way, that would take us forward in a big way.
How would you like to see that actualized? That energetic
well,
way?
They could communicate better that what their positions are on these questions. They could say what they're doing to take forward these issues in these forums that they have access to in a much better way. I do think that, quite frankly, some of them are lazy. They're not particularly interested in these things. They plan parties better than they do run meetings and call student bodies to account.
On that, Chris, first off, that was great. Thank you. I have spoken to some of the SRC members who said that when they had those initial meetings, when they called everyone into residences and asked them, they said the majority of the students didn't want to protest and they weren't behind their campus protesting. So how do we make a student representative council? Because we know we're in a very classist situation here.
Let me answer that directly. The SRC and like management, they have a very subtle way of lying to people, because the first residence they went to was Smart's house, an all-male residence. It's very hard for many of the protesters to understand the logic behind going to men's residence. I think the first three, in fact, were men's residences that they went to these meetings to. These meetings weren't very well organized. It's very hard to access residences as an OppiFM student. Myself, I know many OppiFM students were wondering where is our turn, when is our meeting coming. I do know that someone laughed at the idea that a meeting with 5 people can be called a majority of students, because very often these meetings, I mean, SMUTS, for example, has 70, or I think SMUTS is one of the biggest, but the smaller residences have, for example, 70 students. I'm not quite sure of the number at SMUTS, but I do know that
More than 100.
more than 100, but not all students attended those meetings. And so when they hadn't gone to all the residences, I can assure you of that. They hadn't spoken to OppiDan students, which make up the majority of students, or a big, large percentage, if not the majority. So I do think that there's a bit of that claim of theirs is shaky, that majority of students don't want to protest. But having said that, there is a big fear, even myself, that the academic year will be lost. And many students do feel that we need to go back to school now. It is a problem. It is a dilemma we're thinking about. We've given the government and management from last year, they promised in the agreement that they'll deal with this thing in 8 months. A year later, we were told that there'll be this maximum 8% fee hike. Obviously, we should have maybe pressured them earlier, from earlier on in the year, so that we're not in this situation where we're protesting and exams are coming up. But I do think it's part of the good faith that we've continually engaged with management and government in, is to say, like, we made an agreement, we'll give you the time, we won't agitate, we won't protest, we'll continue in the hope that you'll give us a concrete plan for free education. That didn't happen. It's unfortunate, but what do we do now? Do we accept that another year can go by where we don't have free education? And I think the crisis is really hitting home now. Many students who fought for this are not seeing that a plan will be made. I don't think our government has indicated that free education can be a thing. So we feel like this is our one chance. We've given up so much. We've come a long way. We've forced a lot of people to not study, in the hope that this leverage that we have of shutting down can get us this free education. It is becoming tough right now. It's a dilemma we're working on as students. What do we do now that exams are coming up? And I don't have the answer for that. I'm struggling with it myself.
I think all of the students on campus are having a bit of a sticking point there, irrespective of which side of the fence they fall on. Wesley, what would the consequences for government and for universities kind of be if that academic year was lost? I mean, what is it that government can do here? Where would they actually fall on the spectrum?
Well, let me start off by saying that I believe that Jan Smuts House has been renamed Robert Sobukwe. So if we're going to refer to UCAR, then we might as well refer to it as the unofficial name, Robert Sobukwe.
Wow.
But I think that
it's in the process of changing.
But I think that the question that you are asking links up with that of Chris's sentiments, and I think that it's a very important question. We cannot substitute high quality education at a higher education level and replace it with Bantu education. This is not what we are fighting for. And so therefore, students saying that we want to return to the academic project to prepare for exams means that there is a seriousness about the academic project, and this must be lauded. We cannot drop our standards simply because we want to fight for free higher education. With free higher education goes free higher quality education, and that we must keep and maintain our international and high standards. Although I don't necessarily agree with ratings, but I think that what is important is that the expectations are not lowered.
How do we do that and keep our demands here on the government for free education in general?
Well, I think that, again, it's my role as the kind of person in between, or my role in the revolution, as it almost were, is to agitate and to agitate thought. If Chris is saying that government has had 8 months, well, the students have also had 8 months, you know. And I think that the question, of course, is what have students been doing in the last 8 months? Have they been thinking of alternative ways? Have they been thinking of different strategies and tactics that they used last year, for example? Because we can't just go shut down, because at the moment it would seem that the argument is either it's shut down or it's free higher education. Those are the two the kind of polar points that we're seeing, and that's not necessarily maybe the way that we should be going. We should be thinking of creative ways.
That's a very good point.
It's a noble cause, and it is a cause that must be pursued to all costs, for sure.
So what you're suggesting is that we pursue it, but in a more interesting and imaginative way than what we're approaching right now.
Absolutely. And I also want to say to Chris that as far as the current protest was concerned, that I must say, while I put blame on university managements earlier, that I must put blame on the Minister of Higher Education. The announcement was deliberately postponed for weeks and weeks and weeks. Our university, for example, as far as I know, doesn't have a budget at the moment, precisely because that announcement was deliberately, and it just meant that it was closer to the exams. So you're pushing the announcement because you're playing for time, but you're actually playing towards exam time. And so I think that it's important for us to go back to that original point that, yes, even now students must be thinking and going back and thinking. And this is what I certainly, again, have been saying to people like Chris and to others, that there seems to be a kind of a lack of reflection. You know, how do we change our tactics? How do we engage? What can we do? What can't we do? And it's the chaos, the lack of high structure, as we mentioned earlier. One of the advantages of such organizations where you have that low structure is the creativity. Creativity flows like you would not believe it. We've had these successful student protests for the last year on a number of issues, from a statue that must fall, to rape, to decolonization, to a number of issues have come up. And all of them have come up because of this democratic organization style, but also because creativity just flows from it, which is completely lacking in high-structured organizations.
I see. So it's almost that announcement by Blade almost seems a little decisive when you put it out in that manner. But then again, we do need to reflect a little bit harder on how we're approaching this. Phil, you had something that you were dying to say.
Yeah. One thing that has occurred to me, again speaking as a non-expert, is that this is essentially a strike kind of tactic. And if you look at how unions generally deal with their strike, it's inflicting pain on your own side as well as on the other side, on the basis that the other side's capacity for pain is lower than yours. So it's a matter of trying to calibrate the pain level so that you are not actually destroying yourself while putting pressure on the other side to concede what you're looking for. And, I've personally been quite reluctant to engage too critically on what the protest movement is doing, because I'm very much aware that I'm an outsider. I'm really almost the opposite of the core demographic of the protests. But, we have plenty of academics here who have good theoretical knowledge, practical experience and so on, and, people who know a lot more than I do about these things. So, if the movement would like to get more inputs into what the options are, you should feel free to talk to academics. That's what we're here for. And much as it's, your institution, as much as ours, maybe even more so, because you're the main beneficiaries, we're going to be here after you graduate. So we need to learn from this as well. And if we approach this without being at all arrogant about our prior knowledge and experience, but from a point of view of wanting to learn as well, I think we can learn a lot from each other if we can have a more open engagement.
Now, I think for myself, this is the very difficult question that we face about strategy and tactics. A lot of criticism has come our way. I do tend to disagree with both Wesley and Phil about this idea of strike tactic and us doing more damage to ourselves. I do think that at some point, if we do manage to shut down these universities and exams don't go ahead, I think it's very difficult for the government to fail everybody, or at least most of students. I don't know how it will take a hit. I think many of us have gotten to the point where we feel that, look, we're fighting a battle that's bigger than just ourselves. We're no longer in this personally. It's a generational struggle. It's a struggle for people who are yet to come. Having said that, that's some of the thinking I'm getting from students. My own personal view is that we really need to think about other ways of pressuring the state, but we also need to be thinking about going out of the university, linking this to the type of government we have, the type of government we've had over the last 20 years that's rolled over to a neoliberal onslaught. It speaks about the issue we're facing is not just, I think it's an issue outside the university that's now only coming into the universities. There's a lot of context that we tend to miss when we think about students and this fight and what's going on. For example, Phil was saying earlier, what type of university do we want UCA to become? Students must think about going out into the community and saying, you've maybe not owned UCA before. It's time to take ownership of it. Here's an entry point. Fees must fall. Come and tell Mabizela, tell management that you want them, you mandating them as the owners of UCA to take forward the fight for free education. I don't know. I think my disagreement was that or not disagreement. I think I'm not understanding maybe that if we continue shutting down, that it's necessarily a bad tactic or strategy. I think really it can do it, and considering that the sacrifices that people at FITS, for example, are making, people at UKZN, at UCT, or throughout the country, these various sacrifices that people are saying, it's not about myself, it's about the larger struggle, the point that we're making. So I think that maybe my answer is slightly contradictory, but there's something that we need to think about ourselves, what we're doing, but we also need to continue pressing. I think we can't give up the fight now. We've sacrificed a lot, many of us.
But Chris, you would concede that my criticism about the shutdown is the lack of creativity.
Yeah, yes, definitely. We definitely students have and this is the hard part about organizing. As you said, these loose movements. Some ideas grab students and they grab them for a long time, and it's hard to fight some of these ideas. They have a lot of, because of the success, I guess, that they've had in the past. People seem to think that if we just keep doing it, it might succeed. Now, on the shutdown, it's an interesting one. I think that, and this is personal opinion, I think that it's not so useful anymore. It was useful, but now we're caught in this situation where everyone else is doing it. It's the movement. How do I, as a person who's fighting with others, participate in this fight?